Hey, La Grand Alive. This is Coffee with Will and Jason Link, brought to you by Grand Run Hospital and Northwest Furniture and Mattress. And I'm here with Jason, who is a local youth pastor and writer extraordinaire and a good personal friend of mine. So thank you for joining me today,
You're welcome.
Jason.
I don't think I've heard the extraordinaire part, but we'll see about it.
See, the nice thing about me is that I just assume extraordinaire. And then,
Thanks.
when you do all the terrible things that humans do, then I just get rid of it and, kick you out of my
We
studio.
can edit that out, yeah. Good. Okay.
So the things I kind of wanted to chat with Jason about today is, as I said, he is a youth pastor and also a writer, and he hosts a podcast called, remind me of the name?
Artisan Tree.
Artisan Tree, which explores issues of faith and writing and art. Sorry, faith and art, correct?
Yeah, faith, writing, art, anything that's creative.
Yeah. So he does this podcast, and so he obviously thinks a lot about this. So tell me, Jason, how did you start, first of all, getting into writing, and how has your faith sort of influenced that area of your life?
Right. Well, I got into writing at a very young age. I think when I was in 6th grade. No, actually, I think going further beyond, like back when I was a little kid, I'd take out my...
In the womb, I had a notebook.
But I would have this, like, I'd sit my parents down and I would, like, get my action figures out and I would say, all right, I'm going to tell you guys a story about why these guys are in conflict with each other.
Oh, wow.
and I would just sit them down and, like, and you could tell, like, their pained expression, like, and I would, like, forget, like, oh, shoot, I get to give you this backstory as to why this conflict is so, and they would just sit there and sort of, like, weather my, just going on and on
Plan
and on.
for, all of the money that they're not going to receive from you being rich and famous.
Right, exactly.
As a writer,
No, but they really were supportive growing up. I went to, like, arts camps growing up as a kid, but when I was in, okay, so now I can go to the 6th grade. So I, like, grew up with, like, this constantly coming up with stories and thinking about them, and one time when I was in 6th grade, I was walking home from school, and I was like, wouldn't it be cool if there was a story about ...
Huh.
And I've been living that ellipses ever since.
Huh.
And so I would go home every day, walking home from school and walking to school, and that was my time to just, like, add to the story a little bit. And every day I would add a little bit more and a little bit more. And Saturday mornings, I loved Saturday mornings, I would just lie in bed and just think about my story. And so years later, I went to college, and it was and I love the arts, like, drawing and painting, and I decided I wasn't going to go that route because, like you said, it seems like there's a lot of starvation.
Makes your parents very unhappy. Yeah.
That's right. and so I thought, well, an internal struggle. When you're in college, what's your major? What's your major? You're always trying to figure that out. And I settled on creative writing because it was creative, but it seemed responsible.
Yeah.
And so I went with creative writing, and I took the story that had been on the shelf in my mind since 6th grade, and I said, all right, I'm going to start writing this. And I started writing it, and actually, I published it in 2013, the story.
So you've been writing The Legender. He has a book that's out on Amazon called The Legender since 6th grade?
I haven't been, actually writing it, I'd say, is not thinking about it, as a kid. And of course, like, when you're in 6th grade, you add everything in the kitchen sink. There was time travel in the book at one point in time. It was like, whatever video game I saw was cool, I was like, oh, let's throw that in there too. So,
Fable mixed with Diablo, mixed
yes.
with, like, Powerpuff Girls, internet frenzy, like
all
those
that
things.
stuff would get in there. And then when you become older, it's like you just have to, like, shave all that stuff off. And, like, a lot of stuff stayed, like some basic like the soul of it remained throughout. And so writing it, no, but thinking about development, it was like a part of me all of a sudden, like, getting out on paper. It grew up with me. It was like I don't know, it's kind of creepy to say imaginary friend, but it kind of was.
No,
like,
I get that.
You get that, like, this story that's with you forever, and it's growing up with you, and it's becoming more mature as you're becoming more mature. And, like, finally in college, I was like, I think I've got the chops to do this. And I wrote my first draft, and it was horrible. It was horrible. It was horrible. And I wrote my second draft, not as bad. And then the third draft, I was like, all right, I think this is it. And so
Wow.
a lot of pages in the garbage, but what rose to the top, I think, was the cream. And so you've got this, the book, like you said, is called The Legender, and that's the story that I had since I was 6th grade, and I'm working on various installments of it in the near future. But to get back to your question, so that's that. Okay, how did I get into writing? That was your question. So that answers that question.
Now the faith aspect.
Now the faith aspect. Okay, so I'm a Christian, and so there was this kind of conflict in my head between writing fantasy and being a Christian, and I was like, well, do they have to be in separate boxes? Can I be a Christian fantasy writer? But then again,
if J.R.R. Tolkien and if that were the case, then J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis never would have existed.
I know, but the thing is, I got this idea that you had to write allegory. To be a good Christian, you had to write a good Christian, a good person of the faith. You had to write allegory. Okay, look at C.S. Lewis.
It's the Jesus lion.
Exactly. You have Aslan equals Jesus. The stone table equals
the cross.
The cross.
Yeah.
The white witch equals the enemy.
You could almost translate it.
Exactly. Exactly. And I was like, and so I almost felt guilty at some point in time, or some of the time not writing allegory, like just writing a story because I liked the story, and I felt like if I wrote an allegory, I'd be sacrificing the story, and then for some reason I was like, God, do you want me to sacrifice the quality of the story so I can make it an allegory? Or do you want my character to preach? Like a gospel message? And I was like,
where the character suddenly turns to the camera and delivers the message, in 5 bullet points so that people will, while they're reading, turn to Christ and repent from their sins.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because that happens.
and I didn't want to do that. I wanted this story to be true to the story, and if anything, okay, so I'm going to fast forward because I'm going to fast forward through all my existential debates in my head, what am I doing? And I'm going to get
to college
to
age here, so we can probably put those things together.
Let's fast forward to and let me tell you, I went on a very interesting journey in my mind, trying to get to the point. Let me tell you where I've arrived.
Yes.
I've arrived at this point where you write who you are. I am not a writer of Christian fiction. I am a Christian who writes fiction, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely.
The person I am and the Jesus I follow shapes what I write. But are you going to hear a gospel message, an explicit gospel message? You're not. But the themes in my life, the God I worship, the God I love, and the God I follow, He has definitely affected what I've written.
Sure, absolutely. Well, it's impossible, as you said earlier, art is intrinsically an expression of the self. So
Exactly.
if that is essentially your deepest self, which is rooted in your faith, which is rooted in your God, it's going to come out whether or not, and you don't necessarily have to have those 5 bullet points and your characters preaching to the masses for that to happen.
Right, and I don't do anything like that. I tell a story of, if you want to make it an analogy of anything, it's the story of perhaps a person who follows a crucified Lord, and what does that mean to follow that crucified Lord? What is your identity, and what are you willing to sacrifice in order to get to that identity? But I don't mention anything explicitly, from the Bible in my book. And yet it was interesting. I received a fan letter from a missionary in, I want to say Zimbabwe. I want to say the southern part of Africa. And he told me that even though the gospel message isn't in your face obvious, in fact, it's not even, it's very, 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 very subtle. He said, I could see the gospel themes in there. And there's no mention of Jesus. There's no mention of, in fact, the God figure in the book, he takes sort of a very background. But that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to talk about the journey of a person, of a character who's basically trying to figure out who he is. And I think that...
Which is a very relatable story to people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not, it's much more relatable than a book which, has everything figured out and it's just, concerned with getting you to figure it out too.
Right.
Yeah.
So and it's that story of a person, but it has all the action and excitement of a kid who, like this fantasy story that grew up with me since I was 6th grade. So it's this, anyway, it's almost it's like an autobiography, except it's not.
Well, every piece of art is always autobiographical
Yeah.
at some point.
Yeah.
But the greatest artists are the ones who can take their biography and expand it out to the great meta-biography and connect with other people in the process through themselves.
And that's what I'm hoping to do. And that's what I'm hoping to do with the craft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, do you have I know this is a horrible, horrible thing to ask a reader and a writer, but I'm going to ask it, and we can deal with the emotional fallout in the end. What is your favorite book in keeping with the theories that you've just told me? Favorite book or one of your favorite books? I'll give you an out.
Okay, favorite books are one of my favorite. Okay, I'll give you one of my favorite books. I really like Paradise Lost
By Milton.
By Milton, and again you're like, wait a second, that's obvious. That's obviously scripture, but then again, it's not, because it's a huge expansion on it, and I love at the end of Paradise Lost, when paradise has indeed been lost to Adam and Eve, and you go through this, and you feel like you've just been punched in the gut. Milton did a great job of making me feel like I got punched in the stomach.
Well, from what I understand, I've never read it, but from what I understand, he uses, I believe it's tetrameter, which is like 10 syllables, every line with a rhyme at the end. And I remember my poetry professor in college going like this, and he just hits you and hits you and hits you again and again and again.
Like you're getting beat up, and in a good way, if that makes sense. By the end of the book, I'm like, oh man, and you feel it because you're human, and you're human, and you're like, man, you understand the weight of all this terrible stuff that humanity has to deal with, and it's like, and they're just like taking step one into that. It's
into
like,
Paradise Gained.
Into into Paradise Lost. Like they're stepping out of the garden into the hurt that humanity is going to face, and they're like, this is it. And they even contemplate suicide in the book. Yeah, they're like, maybe we should just die and like be the only ones who have to suffer. And Adam says, no, let's because we do have hope. And an angel gives them a vision of like Christ coming and saving the world. And so like in order for the world to be saved, Eve, we need to have a line, like a biological line, and so let's go forward. And you're just like, you get this punch in the stomach, but being lifted up at the same time. It was like, oh man, that was, by the end of the book, it was just this beautiful, painful feeling that I had, and it was...
And that's how a book should end. That's how a book should end, with you feeling something.
Yeah.
And that's the greatest works of art are the ones that make you feel something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Totally.
And so that would be a work, and again, another one would be Life of Pi.
Is that Aronofsky?
No. That's
He made
Jan
the film.
Martel. Jan Martel.
Okay.
Jan
But I
Martel.
think Darren Aronofsky made the film out of that. I'm pretty sure he made a film out of it.
Okay. I can't.
I
quote
can
you
neither
on that.
confirm nor deny.
Yep. Well, do your fact checking online.
Yeah, don't believe everything I say.
But it's a story about someone looking for faith, and again, there's some theological issues that I disagree with on that book. But again, it's a story that it's where the humanity and the divine are meeting, and they're not compartmentalized, they're not separated, but they're meeting together. That's a book that really impacted me.
I think it's really cool when you can read a book, and I mean, like one of my favorite books is Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. And I remember when I've read it multiple times, and there's this moment when Siddhartha, who has spent his life essentially divorced from his humanity and trying to find God through self-emaciation, through profligacy, and he comes to the end of his life, and he realizes the guilt that he has sort of incurred upon himself, and his wife, who he abandoned, leaves and comes back. And she comes to the river where he's become a ferryman, and she dies in his arms. And it's a beautiful, terrible moment of where this man finally realizes that he loved this woman, and yet now she's gone, and then he's forced to come to terms with the ideas of transience and and to sort of figure out his spiritual realization of the end of the book. But it's a very beautiful moment because it makes you feel something. And I wouldn't say that I'm in any way in agreement with all of the theology of Siddhartha, but that's not the point. The point is, does it make you feel something?
And then you walk away with it and you're like, I want to talk to someone about this, right? And
Exactly.
It opens up discussion. And I think like a lot of the good literature that I've read is a doorway to, hey, dialogue. Let's talk about this. Yeah. So So those are the books that I think have shaped a lot of who I am. Like my top 5, I would say, are those that like have left me like, I've reached a conclusion. I don't like books where they've like reeled me in, like, oh, you think you're gonna get the bait? Oh, I left you with a little bit of cliffhanger there, and then I'm gonna, and you reach the end, and you're like, oh, all I was doing this whole book was chasing cliffhangers, and now I've reached the end, and it's like, whereas like the really good books, it's like you've landed, whether hard or whether you've landed soft, it's like you've landed and you've arrived somewhere, and you're like, okay, that's a good book. That's a good ending.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So last question, we're gonna have to close up here. What's your next? What are you working on next?
Well, I've got tons of ideas. If you ask my wife, like how many times I've said, "Hey, Jasenia, I've got an idea about a book." I mean, every day I seem like having. But there's this one story I'm working on in my head. It's just been sitting there. It's about this guy who. A falling star lands in front of him, and he picks it up, and it looks like a walnut, and he goes out and he plants it. And over time, he leaves his hometown and he goes away to like fight in World War I. And he comes back and he finds that this falling star that he hid out in the woods was actually a seed, and it grew up into like a house.
Oh, wow.
It grew up in like a tree house, if you will, or a house tree, if you will, like has roots and stuff.
It's
but it
some
grows up.
combination of trees and houses.
And people are occupying this house, and so he started like finds himself being the manager of this house, like elves and fairies and stuff. And so he's got this double life where he's in this town, of like this small northern Michigan town, post World War I.
Yeah.
And he's got his life there, and he's also running this inn in the woods with all these like. So it goes back. So that's a project I'd like to work on, and of course. So that's like a writing project I'm going to hit in the future. But there's also the podcast, which is, again, we talk about this idea of
Remind us of the name one more time.
Artisan Tree.
Artisan Tree, and where can it be found? Yes.
Artisantree.org.
Artisantree.org.
And this is where we talk about, and I want to continue the conversation about art and faith and how artists need to contribute to the body of believers in the church.
Absolutely.
Because the church used to be the great patron of the arts.
Mm-hmm. As we were talking, I was thinking about a lot of Russian writers that were Christians, but they didn't necessarily write Christian fiction.
Right.
Yeah.
But and you have all these creators in the church, but unfortunately, and you can't study art history without studying. And to study art history, study church history.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, what the church looks at in its art is, that's it. It's history. It's not something that's in the present. And so that's what my podcast is trying to work on, is trying to bring art back into the church in the present, so we get these creative members of the body actually contributing in some way.
Absolutely. Well, check out, thanks LeGrand Alive for tuning in, and check out his podcast, The Artisan Tree, on iTunes, or theartisantree.org. And
I also have another website called, for my author's page, it's epicjason.com.
epicjason.com. So please visit Epic Jason, listen to his podcast, download his book, and thank you so much, Jason, for chatting with me today.
Thanks.
This video has been brought to you by Grand Run Hospital and Northwest Furniture and Mattress. Please like and share this video, and tune in for more local content on thegrandalive.tv.